It was late September when my friends and I decided to embark on what we thought would be the ultimate adventure. The forest we had chosen, Whispering Pines, was located on the outskirts of a small town in northern Oregon, a place known for its eerie legends and whispered warnings. The stories had been passed down from generation to generation about how the forest was haunted by spirits, trapped forever by an ancient curse. Locals spoke of those who had ventured into the depths, only to disappear without a trace. Despite the warnings, we were determined to challenge the supernatural and prove the old tales wrong. There were 4 of us: Jake, Brian, Emily, and me, Alex. We were all in our early 20s, college friends who had shared countless memories together, but none of us were prepared for the experience that awaited us. The day we arrived in the small town, it was nothing special. The sun was shining, and there was a crispness in the air that signaled the start of autumn. We stopped at a small diner, the only one in town, to ask for directions to Whispering Pines. The old waitress, a woman who looked like she had seen decades of stories pass through her small town, didn't seem surprised by our question. "You kids aren't planning on going to that forest, are you?" she asked, setting a steaming mug of coffee in front of each of us. "Yeah, that's the plan," I replied, trying to hide the excitement in my voice. The woman's face darkened, and she leaned closer to us, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'd be careful if I were you. That forest, it doesn't forget. It's been cursed for centuries. The spirits there don't take kindly to strangers. If you must go, don't stay after dark. Trust me, you don't want to hear what it whispers." We laughed it off, thinking she was just playing into the small town superstition. After all, it was just a forest, right? Sure, it had a dark reputation, but we were experienced campers and adventurers. Nothing could scare us. We thanked the waitress, paid for our meal, and headed out, eager to reach the heart of Whispering Pines. The forest was about an hour's drive from the town. As we arrived, the trees seemed to loom over us, their tall trunks creating an imposing wall of darkness. The air smelled damp, and the sky above us began to cloud over. We parked our car at the edge of the forest, near an old decaying sign that read, "Whispering Pines, enter at your own risk." It was almost as if the forest itself was beckoning us in, calling us to uncover its secrets. We quickly unloaded our gear and set off along the narrow trail that led into the forest. The woods were dense, the underbrush thick with ferns and moss. The sunlight barely made it through the canopy above, casting everything in a haunting twilight glow. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, the sounds of nature fading away. No birds, no rustling of animals in the leaves, just an unnatural silence. "I don't know, guys," Emily said, glancing nervously around. "This place feels off." "Come on, Em, you're just spooked by all those stories," Brian teased. "It's just a forest." But even as he said that, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a feeling that something was wrong. We pressed on, determined to find a good spot to camp for the night. By late afternoon, we had found a small clearing in the woods, surrounded by towering pines. It seemed perfect. We set up our tents and gathered wood for a fire. As the fire crackled to life, the orange glow illuminated the surrounding darkness, and we settled in for what we thought would be a peaceful evening. We cooked our dinner, told jokes, and talked about how ridiculous the local legends were. But as the night grew darker, something began to change. The air grew cold. An unsettling chill seeped into the ground beneath our feet, making the warmth of the fire feel small and insignificant. We all noticed it, but none of us said anything at first. We continued to sit around the fire, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in the pit of our stomachs. And then the whispering began. At first, it was barely audible, a soft rustling in the wind, or perhaps the sound of the leaves shifting. But then it grew louder. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the trees, it was a voice. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all directions. "Did you hear that?" Brian asked, his voice tense. I thought it was just the wind," I replied, trying to laugh it off. But deep down, I felt it too. The voice was close, too close. It seemed to be calling us, but the words were unclear, lost in the shifting air. We all stood up, looking around in the dark. "I'll go check it out," Jake said, trying to sound confident. He grabbed a flashlight and ventured a few feet into the woods, his footsteps crunching softly on the dry leaves. We waited in the silence, the whispering continuing, but growing fainter. Jake returned moments later, his face pale. "There's nothing out there," he said, though his voice wavered. But I swear, it sounded like someone was calling us. "Great, now you've got us all freaked out," Emily said, her eyes wide with fear. We tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere had changed. The woods around us felt alive, watching, waiting. The whispering continued, coming from the trees, from the shadows, from the very ground beneath us. We huddled closer around the fire, the light flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. It wasn't long before we heard it again, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heavy, as though something or someone was walking around our camp. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't an animal, it was something much heavier. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "I'm going out to check," Brian said, his voice trembling. He grabbed a flashlight and ventured toward the woods. "Brian, don't!" I called, but he was already gone, his flashlight bobbing as he moved into the darkness. We waited in silence. The crackling fire was the only sound, and even that seemed to grow quieter as the night deepened. The seconds dragged on. We could hear nothing now. No footsteps, no whispers, no wind. Just an eerie silence. And then a voice, a low, rasping whisper, came from right behind us. "Why have you come here?" We all froze. I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice was soft but unmistakable. It was close, too close. Jake stood up, his hand shaking as he raised the flashlight. "Who's there?" he shouted. No response, only the whispering wind. And then the figure appeared. It was tall, standing motionless just outside the ring of firelight. Its body was shrouded in darkness, but its eyes burned with an unnatural red glow, like embers in the night. The figure stood there watching us, its presence suffocating. "This forest is mine," it whispered, its voice cold and hollow. "Leave now, or you will never leave." None of us moved. The fear that had been building inside us suddenly bloomed into full-blown terror. This was no prank. This was no animal. Something was watching us, something ancient and powerful. "Run!" I screamed. We didn't hesitate. We grabbed our things and bolted, running through the woods, not daring to look back. The sounds of our footsteps were drowned out by the heavy pounding steps that followed us, the figure's footsteps echoing in the darkness. We ran for what felt like hours, but the forest refused to let us go. It was as if the trees themselves were closing in, trapping us in their ancient grip. Every step we took seemed heavier than the last. The air grew thicker, colder, and more suffocating. Eventually, we broke through the trees and found ourselves at the edge of the forest, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We just ran out of the forest down the winding road that led back to town. But even after we escaped, the terror didn't end. The whispers haunted us. The figure with burning eyes appeared in our dreams, and one by one we began to feel its presence in our everyday lives. We could hear footsteps behind us when we were alone. We could feel those burning eyes watching us, always just out of sight. The worst part was when Brian disappeared. One morning, he was gone. No note, no explanation, just gone. It was as if he had never existed. We searched for him, but he had vanished without a trace. The only explanation we could come up with was that the forest had taken him, just as it had threatened. We tried to move on with our lives, but the curse of Whispering Pines never let go. Emily and I, desperate for answers, went to the elder in the town to learn more about the forest's dark history. What we learned sent chills down our spines. The forest had once been home to a thriving village long ago, but the villagers had angered an ancient spirit, a powerful entity that now ruled the forest. In his last moments, the spirit had cursed the village, vowing that their souls would wander in the forest for eternity. Anyone who entered the forest without permission would become a part of it, lost forever. Emily and I knew what we had to do. We had to go back. We had to face the spirit and try to break the curse, or we would never escape. With heavy hearts, we returned to the forest. The darkness was more suffocating than ever. The whispers were louder, the figure with burning eyes always just out of sight. We ventured deep into the woods, determined to face whatever lay ahead. And then we saw him, Brian. But he was no longer the friend we knew. His eyes were hollow, his face vacant. He had become a part of the forest, just another lost soul. As we approached him, the figure appeared once more, its voice deep and terrifying. "You cannot save him," it said. "He is mine now, just as you will be." The power of the forest seemed to crush us, but we didn't give up. Together, Emily and I faced the darkness, determined to free Brian and break the curse. And miraculously, we did. The forest's grip weakened, and we were able to pull Brian from the darkness. But the forest would not let us go without a fight. We ran, the figure chasing us, the whispers growing louder and louder. But this time, we made it out. We stepped into the light, free from the curse of Whispering Pines. Brian, Emily, and I made a pact that day. We would never forget what we had been through. The forest would always remain in our hearts, a reminder that no matter how dark the world becomes, we have each other. And no curse, no force could ever take that away. Whispering Pines was no longer just a forest. It was a lesson in friendship, in love, and in the strength to overcome even the most terrifying of forces. And as for the forest, it waits for its next victim, as it always has. Because the curse of Whispering Pines is never truly broken. It's just waiting for the next souls to wander too far into its depths. But for now, Emily, Brian, and I are safe together and free.